Okay. Are you ready? So here's the deal. I'm going to tell you some stories, but I have some questions I want you to play with. You see, the key to purpose is the questions you ask and the stories that you tell. And each of us has a story. And whether you know what your purpose is or not today, that makes no difference to me. Because if you ask the questions and you sit in these questions over the next 3 days, you will be in that place of purpose. And I'll be here for the next 3 days as well. What I want to say to you is that when we spend time together, I'd love to hear one of your answers to one of the questions I'm going to play with you as we go through this presentation. Okay? So, yeah. Now, let's see if we can get that to work. There we go. The reality about purpose is that it's become very popular. You can see enormous number of articles and things. A Harvard Business Review did work. We even have McKinsey, who's doing actually a number of very good pieces on organizational purpose and individual purpose over the last 6 months. When McKinsey wakes up, you know that something must be happening. Now, what's interesting is that for me, the challenge is that in some ways, the question that we all get asked in the world hasn't changed at all. Here's a version of the question that most of us live in. How's this? Oh. There we go. This is the question when most of us live in, right? What do you want to do when you grow up? So you go to any event, and what do people say? They say, so what do you do? Now, the problem with what you do is it's a very small box. And to think that you fit inside that box is silly. But that's the world we live in. And in some sense, for most of us, when we were kids, that was the only world we actually had the opportunity to answer. Right? What did adults ask us? They said, what do you want to do? What do you want to be when you grow up? Now, as a kid, did any of us have any idea what the answer is? Yeah? Not, what do you do? You watch TV. So I used to watch TV, and I used to like Star Trek. So I used to tell people, I want to be a starship captain. Now, I always got a great response from adults, because they then tried to explain to me that it was just a TV program or whatever, but I really didn't care, because I just loved the kind of response I got. Now, this is me. This is the closest I came to living my dream. This is a Halloween costume that I put on once a year, and usually a couple of more times if I can get away with it. Right? I was talking to my assistant last week. I said, I think I'll wear it when I do my presentation. She says, you are not wearing that thing. And I was like, okay. But here's the thing. The interesting thing about this costume is it represents the journey most of us go on. Most of us, if we're lucky, we get to wear the costume. And it looks at it's either being a CEO, an executive, whatever it may be, you end up winning some award. But what's interesting is if we look at CEOs as an example, their life expectancy is about 3.5, 4 years max. So to spend your whole life trying to get someplace that you spend very little time actually, and spending the rest of your life wishing you could get back to it, doesn't sound like a great deal. But this is the one the world gives us, because this is the question that we live in. Now, in some sense, the power of purpose, and the reason why it's so important, is it makes the container so much bigger. And if I can figure it out, there we go. And in some ways, for me, the definition of purpose is the unique gift that you bring to the world. Now, what does that really mean? Now, here comes my first question for you. It will come. Somehow. I'm back. There we go. Here's the big question, first question. Now, this question is the one I spend the first 6 months with executives working with them on answering. What's the one or two things that only you can do? Now, here's what I mean by this. If I replace you in the job you have in the world, whatever it may be, with someone equally skilled, talented, with similar experience to you, and I give them the challenges I give them your Outlook calendar and everything that goes with it, they're going to do a lot of the things you would have done. So the question is what is it you're going to do that's not just the normal stuff? What's more than just keeping the seat warm? Really? What do you see that no one else sees that if you don't do it, no one else will? And that's the question that I sit with senior executives for 6 months until not only do we have an answer, but we have a clear sense of how they're going to redefine their time, their spending, so that that thing really gets done, because that's their gift that they're bringing to the world. The rest of it is a hygiene factor. That's purpose. And for each of you, the opportunity to think about what is that in your life is a powerful opportunity. Now, when I started this journey, I was back in 2007, and I was sitting in the office of Bill George, who was a professor at Harvard Business School. He used to be CEO of Medtronics. He was on the board of Goldman Sachs, ExxonMobil, Novartis. So he was like this big figure in the world, and he was teaching a course on authentic leadership. And I was a guy that could fix things. Now, at the time, I didn't think purpose was worth much. I was a kind of a results-driven change guy, which I'd spent my life doing. I'd done workouts. I'd put a lot of people, like in this room, this group of people, for 2 or 3 days. We'd take a big challenge. On the last day, management would come in, and we'd make all the decisions in real time, money, resources, everything, and just move. But the challenge became is after about 3 years of doing that with these executives, they say, you know, as much as this was great, it doesn't feel that great. So what else is there? I didn't have an answer. But all of a sudden, I was faced with the challenge of actually having to figure this out. Because purpose, which was on this list, was the one thing in the program that Bill was teaching that really didn't work. And I said, well, of course it doesn't, because it's, you know, it's just purpose. Now, back then, the truth is there wasn't much to read about it. Unless you read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, there wasn't much else to take a look at. And so I didn't think going to a concentration camp was a good way to figure this out. So what happened is I had to figure this out. And I had to live in the question. Once again, it's about living in the question. I had to live in the question of what is purpose really, and how does it really work? Now, the challenge for me was that Bill went ahead and said yes to General Electric, to me teaching a program on purpose to 30 of the top 300 in 2007. And I was in his office going, no, don't do this. And he says, Nick will be there next month. He can't wait. And he hangs up, and I'm like, what were you talking about? Why did you say this? And he's like, you'll be just fine. And I was like, yeah, I'm the one who has to go do this thing, Bill. Right? So here I do. I go to GE Crotonville, which is the sort of the center of the universe at the time. And let's see, the magic of the slides. And this is this place. This particular room is called the Pit, because this is where Jack used to fire people. And they told me that as they take me right to that spot and say, okay, now teach purpose. It was like, there's a message here. Between 2007 and 2010, I got to work with these executives, and I watched stock of GE go from 56 to 6. That was very helpful. Warren Buffett came and saved these guys. And what was interesting, though, is that 2010, we started to have executives come back from some of the earlier programs that I taught. And this one guy walks in, and he stands in front of the room, and he's there to answer questions. And the first question is from a woman, Susie, and she says, so what are we going to learn here that's actually going to help us deal with the crazy world that we now live in? And he sort of pauses, because it wasn't the question he thought he was going to get. And he looks at her and says, you know, Susie, most of what you're going to learn here isn't going to help you. Most isn't going to help you. Look, I spent my career motivating people by giving them dangling job opportunities, promotions, bonuses, stock options, and all of that was gone. It's all gone. The only thing I had to stand on was my purpose. I literally fell out of my chair as he said this, because I thought I was one of the things that didn't work. He says, my purpose. He said, my purpose is to be the whitewater raft guide that safely gets you to the other side. Now, he said, at age 21, I saved 4 people's lives that summer that would not be here tomorrow. And I promise you, that's the leader that stands in front of you right now, and we're going to make this work. Now, as he said this, everybody in the room wanted to go work for this guy in that moment. Now, for me personally, that was the first time I'd ever actually experienced purpose show up in the room. What I realized is it wasn't an intellectual exercise, you feel it. And then I went, oh, this is about connecting head to heart. This is the whole game. Okay? So now I started to understand what purpose was really about. Now, in some ways, what he also taught me was the power of purpose is the ultimate antidote to uncertainty, because it's the one thing that doesn't change. In some ways, we live in a world, and we've dealt with COVID and all the things that go along with it. Strategies have been all destroyed in every company that we can think of relative to what we had before COVID, during COVID, and trying to make a forecast for what's going to happen in the next 12 months is anybody's guess. But the one thing that won't change is your purpose. So in some sense, we as humans still need that level of certainty and stability. Now, McKinsey has woken up, of all things, and they have this great article called Help Your Employees Find Purpose or Watch Them Leave, right? I'm like, oh, what a great title, right? And they got some great data. So the data is that nearly 2/3 of employees are really wondering what their purpose is. Yeah? I'm pushing the button. There we go. 50% of employees in the US are reconsidering the kind of work they do, right? 70% of employees say that their sense of purpose is largely defined by work. And only 15% of frontline workers have any clue. This is a problem. So all of a sudden, we're starting to see data that really makes it clearer and clearer how important this is and how much of a gap there is between those who do have a sense of purpose and those who would like to have a sense of purpose. Now, there's another, this is even more interesting. So basically, they looked at what are people's experience of life and work if they don't have a sense of purpose, and what is it if they do? The black dots are what it looks like when you don't have a sense of purpose. And the blue dots are the impact of people and organizations who do have a sense of purpose. Now, for all of you sitting in organizations, which organization do you want to work for? Which one do you think is going to do better? I mean, this is not hard to understand, right? So in some sense, it's an enormous amplifier of how an organization operates. Okay? Now, I want to tell you a story about Jostein Solheim. Jostein Solheim is to thrive in ambiguity and paradox for things that matter. And I remember helping him figure out his purpose about 10 years ago. And he had just taken a business that was iconic business, and he had turned it around, and he'd been promised that if he did this, he would then get a 2-step promotion, move to London, and golden handcuffs and all those things. And the challenge is as he looks at that, he looks at his purpose and says, you know, if I take that promotion, I won't be living my purpose. And the place I'm working is a great place. But it's like I've spent my whole life wanting this thing, and now it's interesting, now that I know my purpose, I actually don't care anymore. Well, he's the CEO of Ben & Jerry's. Spent 8 years as CEO of Ben & Jerry's. And actually, he was instrumental in 2016 in their whole initiative around a flavor that was related to Black Lives Matter. He was the first one to do the GMO initiatives. And so we did a number of things, and he also grew Ben & Jerry's to becoming that iconic brand that we now know it is today. Now, he handed the reins to his colleague, and I've worked with both of these individuals. He handed it to Matthew. Now, Matthew has a very different purpose. So if you look at his purpose statement, it's leading others to find the joy, awe, and justice in making their song. Interesting. Very different purpose, yes? Well, very different time because he's been CEO the last couple of years. So with all the events with George Floyd, Ben & Jerry's was one of the key advocates of a message of what was really needed. But what's interesting is one of his most interesting adventures is with Facebook. He was the one who started the boycott of Facebook. And once he did it, everybody else had to. Okay? But when you look at his purpose, he talks about it, how much justice is at a core who he is, it's very clear why he's the perfect CEO for Ben & Jerry's in this moment. Interesting how purpose all connects. Yeah? Now, I want to talk to you about some of the sources of purpose. So the first one is magical moments from our childhood. So I'm not saying I had a magical childhood, and I don't think most of us did, but there's a moment when the curious kid inside of us really spoke to us and saw things. Before the world told us who we should be, that's what I'm talking about. The second area I want to talk about is the challenging life stories and how we get ourselves out of them are a beautiful test of real purpose. And the third area is something that really speaks to us in our life. It may be a hobby, it may be a passion of some sort that really speaks to us in that core place inside of us. Now, let's take the magical moment piece, and let's play with that one for a moment. And in some ways, this is one of my questions for you, is what is your magical moment from your childhood? You don't have to answer it right this minute, but whenever people go there, it makes them smile. And for many of us, we haven't thought of these stories in a very, very long time. Well, I want to introduce you to has become a very good friend, Anna. So Anna's purpose turns out to be inspiring others to take a chance and own the stage. Now, here's the thing about her, is when I first met Anna, she was a buttoned-up New York lawyer. Her identity was, I'm a New York lawyer. But when we started to have her tell her stories of what her magical moments as a child was, she started jumping up and down and talking about loving to do plays, and she started using all these different voices and started singing, and everybody else in the room, as we're doing this, is going, who is this person? Because they had known her as this and she's like jumping up and dancing, and then on the break, she starts doing a little tap dance thing, and we're like, where did she learn this? And they're like, who is this person? Well, once we released this out of her, we couldn't put it back. And now what happened after this event where we worked with her in this journey of purpose, the marketing people would come into her office and they'd come to me afterwards and say, what did you do to her? Because we went into her office to look at this event that we had to do to get the signing, the legal, but then she redesigned the whole event and said, it's not magnificent enough. Let's really take the top off. And she helped them redesign it. So now, all the time, the marketing people would go to her office and redesign things. And she's our secret weapon, right? So she also now is in charge of rolling out organizational purpose. She grabbed it and said, I want to be responsible for this and make this happen. And she has like rooms of people, and she gets up and she does her whole thing, and then afterwards, they find out she's a lawyer. They're all like, how is that possible? So the beautiful thing about purpose is it's the only identity that is yours. It's the only one that no one gives you and no one can take away. It owns you in some ways. When you build your relationship with your purpose, it gives you the freedom to be who you really are, no matter what your title and what your role is. So Anna was a beautiful example of what that looks like. So the next adventure is on the crucibles. And I want to tell you my story. There are, for all of us here, challenging moments in our life. I've had many of them. I have been divorced. I had a 14-year-old daughter who almost got killed by getting run over by a car, and her friend did get killed. I've almost lost a business. I've had many challenging moments in my life. Now, what's interesting is for some of these, what happens is the weather changes. Situation changes and the problem goes away. But in others, the reality is that what happened is I had to dig myself out. That's the place purpose resides for many of us. That's the place purpose resides for many of us. And in some sense, what I had to do is go back and look at my stories to look at where purpose really showed up. When I was 15 years old, my family moved to Charleston, South Carolina from Atlanta. This is 1975. We moved from a house into a basement apartment overlooking a swamp. Went to the worst school system in the United States, and when you move in the middle of the school year, if any of you have kids, moving in the middle of the school year is terrible anyway. Now, I was a very quiet, reserved, shy guy. So I was afraid of my own shadow. Going to a new school, all this stuff. My parents were yelling at each other all the time. They were miserable. And I was miserable. So one day I decided I was going to go get on my bike and ride to a bookstore. And I found some books were a place I escaped to, but I was looking for some insight. And I pulled off, there was no self-help section back then. I pulled this book out, and it was on Lincoln. And I picked to the section where his mother dies when he's at the age of 9. So I quickly closed the book and go, okay, that's not helping. So I pick up this book. I'd heard about Winston Churchill. So I opened the book on Winston Churchill. And it's in the 30s when everyone hated him. So I said, well, this isn't helping. And then I pick up a book on Gandhi, because I'd heard about who he was. And it turns out I pick up the section where he goes back to South Africa the second time and he's about to be lynched. So I quickly close the book and go, this is not working. This is not helping. So I pick up a book on levitating monks. Figured this has got to be good. Well, it's a section about their rigor of having to get up at 3 a.m. and all the things they had to do all day long and how tough it was. And I'm like, so I remember sitting there on the ground and realizing that all these people had achieved their ultimate fullest expression of who they were, but they'd had things happen to them that were much worse than what was happening to me in that moment. And in that moment, I realized my purpose. My purpose at that level, and how I languaged it then was just to really help all of us access that deeper sense of who we really are. Now, my purpose, as I word it today, is to wake you up, just really wake you up, and have you finally be home. Have you finally be home. Okay? So that's how I word it. But in some sense, that's when it first showed up. So for many of us, those are the moments that are key. Okay? Now, I'll show you another adventure. There you go. So, something you love that really touches you. Yeah. So I'm in Holland. I do programs all over the planet, and I got a call to work with a bunch of Dutch bankers. Now, if there's ever a group you never thought you'd have to work with or want to work with, Dutch bankers is probably one of them, yes? But these guys were amazing. And this one guy I'm sitting down with, and we're having this amazing conversation. We're working on his purpose, and here's what we come up with. Max's purpose is, I'm the Lego poet that with words will build a bridge from head to heart. Cannot tell you how many people have Legos in their purpose statement, because it's their magical moment from their childhood, right? So I'm sitting there and I say, well, we're in a program, we're rolling out a program for like 5,000 leaders. I says, could you write me a poem about this program? And he looks and says, I do my poetry in Dutch. I said, okay, well, think about it. Think about what would be a purpose poem and what would it look like? Would you like to see? Yeah? Okay, here we go. Oops, sound.
One here is the same. As Gandalf's knocking on your door, you're much more than your name. In everybody lives a song that sounds deep down inside, with words that are precious and strong, but barely come to life. The purpose of your leadership is anchored in the lyric, powerful and authentic. Gather a team to make a trip because you've nothing else to do but start an open-minded search. These days it is all about you. Embrace the findings that emerge. It takes a joint effort to find what moves you, captured into words. Some make you laugh, sometimes it hurts. It proves you're one of a kind. Although it may take you a while, your crucible stories provide insights with no reason to hide, as do stories that make you smile. The essence you yourself will hear when telling it a 10-year-old. Not hesitant, without fear, genuine, straightforward, bold. In a purpose to impact plan, your intentions get focused. By adding who, how, what, and when, you start living your purpose. Be frank and do honor your past. Your purpose is already there. It is looking for you to share the keywords that will fit at last. And when you, in everyone's presence, tell your purpose right out loud, all comes together in that sentence, and indeed will make you proud. Your purpose will start to glow the moment we hear what we see, and what that means to you will show when you tell us, this is me.
That's Max. The first time he did this and he recorded it, he did it in his bathroom, and his shower curtain was a bunch of little rubber duckies. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be so good. But then they decided they wanted to do this version, right? And I was like, I still like the rubber ducky version, right? But here's the point, is this is him living his purpose, right? And this is the beauty of purpose, is it will get us to do things that nothing else will. And to give a chance for the kid inside of us. For me, when people say, here's what I think my purpose is, I always go and say, is the curious kid inside this person jumping up and down for joy? If it is, then it's their purpose. If it isn't, I don't know what it is, but it's not purpose. That part of you has to be fully present in the adventure. Yeah? Who do you want to be led by, the serious person or the curious kid? Right? So, in some ways, that's the opportunity of that journey that we're talking about. Now, one of the interesting challenges with purpose is, see, I think that many people think once they have the purpose, everything works. My experience is purpose is not happiness. If you want to be happy, buy some Ben & Jerry's ice cream. It really works really well, right? A lot of you have, by the way, because I've been talking with them and their sales are doing really well these days. If, on the other hand, you want purpose, look, purpose is if your life's working and people love you and the world wants to give you lots of money and you've got a great marketing team and you're really doing well, you don't need purpose. But if you are having to do it, you're struggling with whether you're the right person or not, the world doesn't seem to be agreeing with you or helping you, and you have to do it anyway, that's purpose. That's what purpose is. Okay? It's in that powerful place where nothing else is going to help you, but it will make sure you get to the other side. So in some sense, one of the reasons I had to acknowledge Davin and the team was because that's what they did to make this event happen. And for me, the powerful thing about purpose and being in an event like this, it's the labor of the people who create it that's the container that the program exists in. And when the kind of giving and service that they did shows up, then it makes it that we sit in that space together. That's purpose. Okay? That's what purpose really looks like. And so in some ways, that's the journey that I get to go on as I sort of work with organizations, is how do we find that presence and bring that out? It's always there, and how do we access it? Now, one of the early challenges I realized when we did this is people would then go out and they would say they have a purpose statement, and it was kind of like, this is my Myers-Briggs score as well, right? Or my disc or whatever. And I'd be like, okay, that's not working. That's not working for me. So one of the things I realize that we all need is we need to have a conversation with our purpose that forces us to really be honest about what really matters to us. And this is a purpose to impact plan. Now Saskia, this is one of my Dutch friends. Her purpose is, I'm the rock chick that creates rain in the desert. Oh my gosh. It's like when you meet her and she says this, you're like, oh, I don't care what you're doing, we're gonna hang out together. Because it's just like, she's got this energy and you're like, let's do it, right? And she's a mom of 2 kids and she was in the desert and it rained and then there was flowers and the whole thing. So it's based on a real story of what really happened. But here's the thing, this is her plan of how she's gonna live her purpose. And what's interesting is it's got both the personal stuff and the work stuff, but it also has the company purpose as well. ING's purpose is empowering people to stay one step ahead in life and in business. And the opportunity is to see, where does she show up in the show? You know, the way I look at purpose statements is a purpose statement is like a title to a movie. It's a set of words. So if I say Casablanca, Gone with the Wind, Empire Strikes Back, Pulp Fiction, some of those you're going to say, oh yeah, okay. Now if you didn't see the movie, the word doesn't mean anything. But if you saw the movie, then you have probably a scene in your head. There's probably a favorite movie for each of you that you have, that if I mention that name, you'll go, oh yeah, and you get all excited. Well, you're not excited about the words. What you're excited about is the movie, and the movie's the story. And in some sense, the power of a purpose is in the stories that we tell about what the words mean. That's where purpose resides. Now, at organizational purpose, and I've got a group I'm working with right now, the key thing I do in organizational purpose, I say, which words speak to you the most and why? And what you get is a Rorschach test of everybody's relationship with the purpose, but each person gets to be the author of their relationship. The beautiful thing about purpose is no one can give us the meaning. We're the only ones who can own it. So in this case, what we find is for many people, they don't really own their purpose and what it means until they start to actually define what they're going to really do. And how is it going to show up in the world? So in some sense, having a purpose is nice. How you live your purpose is what really matters. And when you do this across thousands and thousands of employees in an organization, you start to get what you saw in that McKinsey study, which is a whole shift in how the organization operates. So I now want to go to the world of COVID. Turns out that if you have had the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine, they are both the gift of purpose. I was with Albert Bourla, who's the CEO of Pfizer, about a month ago. We had a powerful conversation about how they were able to pull the vaccine off. And I asked him, I said, what role did purpose play? He said, purpose was everything. Because at the beginning of this journey, we had no idea whether what we were going to do was going to work, and I had to put $3 billion on the table, and we had to put manufacturing in place that we'd never done before. We had no idea how to do it. We had to break every rule. And I said to everybody over and over again, whatever you do, go look at the purpose statement, and our purpose is to create breakthroughs that save people's lives and make the decision from there. Make the decision from there. Okay? Now, the Moderna story is even more interesting because it's a story of personal purpose. So Tal his purpose is to translate science into medicine. Now, when he came up with this about 10 years ago, I thought it was kind of a boring purpose statement. But I always assess someone's purpose statement based on how excited they get, and if they get really excited, I'm like, it must be right. So he's all excited. He said, look, the word translate means you take the DNA and you transcribe it into mRNA, messenger RNA, which then gets translated into proteins. And he says this, and I go, it just sounds like gibberish to me, but okay, if it works for you. So about 5 years ago, he calls me and says, I have to talk. I says, why? He says, I might take a job in Boston working for a startup, and I need some advice. So he says, well, the good news is that their purpose is my purpose. They take messenger RNA and turn it into proteins. So I said, well, how do you feel? He says, I feel really excited and a little scared. I go, okay, that's the place you always want to be. That's where purpose shows up. When you're really excited and a little scared. So he says, okay, and he takes it. Well, he's the chief medical officer for Moderna. So about a year and a half ago, he calls me and says, okay, I'm now really, really excited and really scared. I says, why? He says, well, we're looking at COVID, and we think we can pull it off. Now, we're only 800 people organization. Pfizer's 80,000. There's only 800 of us, and I have to be the one. If I decide to do it, it's the company. Everything is on the table. We've never actually had anything get beyond clinical trials. So once again, I say to him, well, let's go back to your purpose statement. So if I was your purpose, what would I do? He says, I got to do this thing. So he does it. Now, we now know how it all turns out. Okay? We now know how it turns out. And I said, well, and I've talked to him. He says, I've never been more excited and scared in my life. He says, when Netanyahu calls you up, you're like, uh-oh, okay, what is going on here? Or when Trump calls you up, or whoever calls you up, he says, that's a whole different world than the one I used to live in. Now, in some ways, one of the most powerful questions you can think about around purpose is, well, where in your adventure in your life are you really excited and a little scared? Where are you really excited and a little scared? Here's the challenge. Many of the people I meet are overworked and bored. Think about all the things you do and how much of it is just worky, but actually slightly boring. The people who work in companies who are really excited and a little scared are people doing really amazing things, and they're going to go places. And when you create that inside your organization, you go to the amazing places that everybody wants to go. Because this is the place purpose resides. Now, why? Here's the thing. I think we live in a world in which most of the time we follow Google Maps. Right? And it tells you how long it's going to take. Okay? And if you get there a little couple minutes early, you feel better. If you get there a couple minutes late, you feel like something's wrong. That's life. You have a set of expectations and you expect it to be delivered. The challenge with that is there's no leading. There's no leading in that world. In the place that you're really excited and a little scared, it's a place where there's no map. That's why it's so exciting and a little scary. So the question for you is, do you want to be someone who follows the Google Maps? Or do you want to be a map maker? Purpose, if you're really living your purpose, you're a map maker. That's how you know you're living in purpose. So in some ways, looking at the parts of your life where this is true is where purpose is alive for you right now, right here in this world. Okay? And if you don't have a good answer, then let's spend the next 3 days and let's go find it. Right? Everybody who's going to be speaking on this stage knows exactly what it feels like to be in this place. Right? And the invitation is for all of us to go to that place together. Does that make sense? Okay. Now I get to have a little fun with you. Now, I'd love to know how many of you have this brand at home. Exactly. They got their hands up. I can see them. And exactly. And your kids, are they enjoying it? Yes? Yeah. Have they saved your life, Lego? In the sense of keeping them busy while you're like, okay, so I've been working with Lego for 10 years, right? I'm this weird guy that gets to work with Ben & Jerry's, Lego, West Point. It's just really weird. A bunch of bankers, it's all very strange. But only purpose would have all those things showing up in the same. Then I get them all together, and they actually really have a great time, which is even more amazing. But here's the interesting thing. Lego's a wonderful cautionary tale. Lego has had a purpose longer than most of us have been alive. Lego's purpose is to inspire your children to become the builders of tomorrow. That's the purpose. Inspiring children to become the builders of tomorrow is the purpose of Lego. It's been the purpose of Lego since the 1960s. Now, most of us have a fairly rosy picture of working in what it must be like to work in Santa's workshop, yes? Okay, toys are a really tough world as I work with these guys. Now, here's a beautiful cautionary tale. Let's think about this. How many of you would like to work in an organization that has double-digit growth for 10 years? Not talking 10%, we're talking like 15, 20%. Yeah? I mean, this is the dream everybody has, right? It's a downside to this, because this is what happened to Lego. So about 2001, 2002, they had a reawakening. They stepped back into the core of who they were, and they really stepped into their purpose. And they really went for it, and they grew enormously. And between 2009 and 2016, they had double-digit growth. They became the most revered brand, even more so than Ferrari, about 2015. Right? And in 2016 to 17, they went from 20% growth to -7%. Now, how many of you would like to live through a 30% drop? Now, some of you may have in the last year, so that may not be a rhetorical question. But when you're Santa's elves and all of a sudden you have a 30% drop, it really makes life really complicated. What happened? Here's what happened. Is for about 5 of those last years, everybody decided that it was more important to follow the formula and not screw anything up, and to be focused internally, and to be focused on just getting new products out. Now, the question they were asking was, how do we make next year's forecast? Not, how do we create the builders of tomorrow? And what happened over time is they lost the secret sauce. Now, what they lost they lost being aware of the world. Toys R Us calls them up and says, stop shipping, we're going bankrupt. Now, it was pretty obvious to the rest of us that that was going to happen, and only a question of when. It was a shock to them. Amazon was something that they didn't really understand. They were still putting ads on Nickelodeon for SpongeBob, and they didn't realize YouTube was taking over every one of your kids. All of a sudden, they wake up, but what they did is they stepped back, really decided that they wanted to be their purpose. And they said, from the place of purpose, what do we now see? They realized that instead of just putting out products, they needed to be the place that was for safety and creativity and fun, not only for children, but for you. And they realized that the opportunity was for Lego to be equivalent to togetherness and family. And they redesigned their whole way of looking at who they were, how they were operating, and how they wanted to proceed. Now, in some ways, purpose has its greatest power when you have it and you lose it and you get it back. Because when you get it back, you really actually own it in a very different way. So for them, this was the big aha. Now, here's the interesting thing. It's edgy. It's challenging, because here's what happened. When my friend at Ben & Jerry's decided to boycott Facebook, so did everybody else, including Lego. But what's interesting is everybody 6 months later went back, except for one company. Lego did not, because they realized that their purpose was too sacred. They want to make sure that kids are safe, and they're not going to have their name associated with something on Facebook that doesn't have kids feel safe, creative, and fun. Now, for part of the world that they advertise in, Facebook was their only means of advertising, so this was a huge internal challenge. But they made the hard choice. In some sense, it's about doing the hard right over the easy wrong. That's the opportunity for all of us. In some sense, it's a beautiful example how purpose truly, truly shows up. Truly shows up. So, in summary, the fundamental opportunity is to sit in these questions. Look, what I know is it's sitting in the question in some sense, just like what Lego did, sitting in the question of what is the purpose speaking, not what the forecast is asking me to do, is what gives you such a very different container in which you create the future. For each of us, this is the biggest opportunity, is how do you sit in these questions? And for me personally, every time I get an answer, I still continue going back and asking the question because I continue to discover the deeper and fuller and richer version of what this means for me personally, as well as those that I work with. And in some ways, that's the power of purpose. So my intent today was to answer the question of why purpose, but was also to pull you into the journey of thinking about how does that connect to each of you? What is your journey, and how do you live it more fully? And so I look forward to seeing you over the next 3 days and hearing some of your stories. So thank you very much.
Can we give Nick one more time? Now listen, before you get off the stage, hold on, because we have 2 minutes and 25 seconds, because I started this early.
Oh, okay.
So, just so you guys know, Nick and his team came in all the way from Boston, right, to here, beautiful downtown Mount Clemens, the heart and now uptown of Macomb County. And we were having a conversation. My office is like right down the street here, and it overlooks the street that you guys walked in on. And we're on Zoom, and he's like, so where's this purpose thing happen? What's going on and everything? And I take my computer, and I look out the window, I'm like, Nick, you gotta come see this place. He's like, I'm there. As long as I can get my stuff, the vaccines, everything taken care of, I'm there. And we were talking about where was this talk gonna go in the lineup? And you know, as we started to think about what this morning needed to look like, everyone had questions around what is purpose? What is my purpose? And I want to tell you, as I have gone through this journey, because we constantly are rediscovering kind of how we express our purpose in each moment of every single day. The conversations that I've had with you as we've planned this out, just little things like you're pointing out our team put into, sign together purpose and action, those types of things. Our team has been blessed by your words, your encouragement, and pointing out just the little things about how we've gotten to show up every single day to bring this. So thank you for making the trip from Boston. Thank you for being here all week. Nick will be on a panel discussion on day 3. You'll get to see him again with some other speakers that you're going to meet, and he'll be around all week long. So I encourage you to engage him and to participate in this conversation so that you can continue to take the things that he just shared with you and make a difference when you walk out those doors. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, my friend.
Appreciate it.